This is the first talk for the lay community of St Benedict at Easter 2020 on Good Friday. There is a printable document you can refer to again if you wish. This is the slideshow version, and an audio is also available. This talk has an interactive component. If you want to join in, you will need something to help you record any thoughts or ideas you might have and want to share. A pencil and paper or mobile phone, for example. In this talk, you might also like to have a piece of wood, like a small log or twig or a wooden cross. If you want to take a longer break in the presentation to think about any part of it, just use the pause button at any time. Thank you for inviting me to give these talks. I'm enjoying being a member of the lay community of St Benedict, and I hope you are too. I was asked to speak about Isaiah chapter 55, especially verse 1. Now, many of you don't know me very well yet, but some will not be surprised to find that I'm not going to do just that. First of all, there are two talks, one for Good Friday and one for Easter Saturday. In the first one, for Good Friday, I will also explore some themes relevant to remembering the crucifixion of Jesus. And in the second, I will also look forward to the celebration of Easter Day. In both, I will talk about my walk from Land's End to John O'Groats in 2019, and I will also explain what it is to use a remembered Bible. Ho! The whole of Isaiah chapter 55 starts with ho! Ho is a sort of greeting, like woot. Other forms of greeting are available. The chapter as a whole promises good things, and who would not want some of this? But in order to receive these good things, we need to accept the invitation. We need to understand that the invitation is for us, but not just for us. So, ho! Let's begin with greeting each other. In these virus-prone days, we've been warned about certain sorts of greetings, ones we shouldn't do. A Cuban medical team in masks and gowns arrived in Italy to be greeted with elbow bumps. Greetings are very cultural. They get embedded in our behaviour and are hard to change. So if we can't do the ones we're used to, we may feel a bit foolish or vulnerable. Therefore, we need to practice new greetings. You may have already been doing that. Elbow bumps are in, so are thumbs up and waving. You might like to use British Sign Language, or BSL, the language of the British deaf community. We have made a video to show you how to say "Peace be with you" in BSL that you might like to practice, and then you could use your phone to send a greeting to a friend. Spend some time practicing this greeting now if you like. Greeting is linked to welcome, and welcome can be harder to get right than you think. It's not just a matter of loudly shouting "Welcome" to each other. In 2019, I walked from Land's End to John O'Groats as I began my retirement. I actually come from a family of end-to-enders. The end-to-end is another name for the journey from Land's End to John O'Groats, or vice versa. My husband Bob walked it in 2003, and my daughter Hannah walked it in 2012, so I was the only one of our family still to do that walk. I thank them and others of you for help and support over the 117 days and the 1,110 miles it took me. It was amazing. It's also called Le Jog, which means Land's End, John O'Groats. Le Jog is a form of inspiration, around which there are many little whirling vortices, a bit like one of these Mandelbrot patterns. Each fragment of inspiration releases another opportunity for further inspiration. Inspiration is a word made up by Bob to mean both inspiring and exploration. Well, obviously we couldn't use the word expiring as it already means something else. One of the things I was aware of on my walk was welcome. Let's do some inspiration on that theme now. We stayed in many different places and we visited lots of others. In some places a welcome is clean towels piled on the bed. In another it's a small deep freeze of local ice cream beside a canal. I wonder if you can think what you think of as welcome. Have a think about it now. Here is an expression of welcome from some of the places we did visit. When on the jog, each step opened up a new opportunity. At the start of the walk I was tired and out of sorts with the world, the church and everyone in it. I didn't know if I could do the walk, and almost every day I came to a point where I thought I couldn't. As I crept over the start line, things immediately started happening. A rainbow appeared above the first church at Sennen, a church which has been there since 520 AD. I began to walk. It was a cross path, a path lined with old crosses. New treasures emerged from the hedgerows as I walked past. Primroses are one of my favourite flowers. I saw primroses every day for at least a month. Not just one or two, but hundreds and even thousands of them. I saluted as many as I could. This was a welcome, not a feeble half-hearted attempt to pull me in, but an ever-present overflowing of generosity too amazing to count. Welcome is a key aspect of Benedictine life. At Tewkesbury Abbey in Gloucestershire, we were reminded of how many of the monastic houses in Britain had Benedictine origins, like this one. Some, like us, still try to live the rule, and the cafe there is an expression of the way the Benedictines of Tewkesbury currently express this. The soup was good. The town is right by the River Severn, and I was walking on the Severn Way at this point. That's not something I would have been able to do in February 2020, when much of the Severn was under flood watch, and many riverside towns, villages and farms were under water. As you read and listen to this, many people will still be dealing with the aftermath. So take a minute to think about those people and communities now. Each day I wrote a blog. You can still read it or watch the video. The links are given at the end of this presentation. It evolved as I went along, but one of the things I did was reflect on the Bible. So how did I do that? Well, I used my remembered Bible, something I've consciously been doing for over 25 years. The Remembered Bible, or RB, is the Bible that's in you. It may be made up of things you have collected over your lifetime, and which you add to as you hear and think about the Bible, day by day, alone or in community. If we were meeting face to face, I'd try this out with you, but instead here is a small piece of video from another community which will show us something of how to do it just for now. This is a picture of that church, which is in Shire Green in northeast Sheffield. Go on then, you go first and tell us. Healing. Yes, it was healing some people up this end on the street. Thank you, that's exactly what I mean. Two people there must be after his bit of string though, don't you? There must be. The Last Supper. Feeding of the 5,000, what do you think that's going to be? Go over the middle, yeah? Okay. Come on then, where are you going to go? Oh yeah, the crown of thorns, that's a very good one, yeah. Oh yeah. Anyone got it? He's got one by... Right, this young man's told us about when they moved the stone out of the way of his tomb. Oh, going into the wilderness after he got, Jesus got lost in the temple. Down here was all sorts of things about what happened in his ministry, like turning the water into wine, like healing a blind man, healing a leper, the Sermon on the Mount. He goes to Jerusalem, right? He has the Last Supper with his friends. He carries his cross. He wears a crown of thorns. He's crucified, and he's put in a tomb. And the resurrection when the stone is moved away from the entrance to the tomb. Brilliant. I think that was absolutely brilliant. Don't you? Absolutely. When I remember the Bible myself or with others, I usually begin with the Gospel, and hopefully we'll do some of that later in this session. But for now I want to talk about the Psalms, as they are very Benedictine. In his rule, St. Benedict puts a lot of thought into the Psalms and which ones fit best with worship as the day progresses. As I was walking along, I was using my remembered Psalms as part of my reflections. So try this now. I call this Remembering the Bible Activity 1. What Psalms or bits of Psalms do you remember? Most people don't seem to remember the numbers necessarily. It's just as well, because they are numbered differently by Catholic and Reformed worshippers. So don't worry about what the number is. It's not a test, and no response is a wrong one. Rather, are there phrases you remember from the Psalms or images and ideas? Make a note of some on a piece of paper or on your phone, for example. As you sit quietly with your list of phrases or images, can you piece them together? I call these psalm snippets. They may make up a verse or a few lines, but even that can be enough to nourish us. Put some of yours down and share them later. You could post them to a friend or send them on a text or a social media message. Make your own psalm postcard if you like the one I've made here. During the jog I remembered 33 different bits of psalms, which quite surprised me, as I didn't know that I had that many in my remembered Bible. Most were just a phrase or at most a verse. I'd repeat them over, sometimes making up a tune as I walked along. Some psalms I would remember fondly, quite often, as they fitted into the context readily. I would often lift my eyes to the hills, or consider, "The Lord is my shepherd," or even, "That everything that has breath praises God." Alongside these psalms, I also considered my usual habit of remembering the Bible depending on my context. Something would come up and I would see how it resonated with Scripture. It's a kind of remembered Lectio Divina. Instead of considering the words over and over on the page, you walk with them over and over in your mind. And so there were many lilies of the fields, sparrows in abundance however cheap, sheep lost and found, gateways, gardens, fishermen, and places to have tea. About 20 other bits of the remembered Bible altogether on the walk. In one place, Dottie's tea shop, the owner gave me a donation for the work of the lay community with young people, and on another occasion a man in a farm vehicle who'd stopped to talk also gave me a donation. So let's try remembering the Bible activity 2. Spend a moment thinking what piece of the Bible you might take with you on a long journey and why. Make a note of it if you like, or send me a message about it, as I'd like to know what you thought. You can email me at janet@bobjanet.org.uk. If you were going to remember the Bible, the Gospel especially, where would you start? Often people begin with Jesus as a baby, which makes sense. It's still a common enough image in British culture. But the thing that struck me as I walked up the country was that the cross was there all the way. From Land's End to John O'Groat, in every place there were crosses. Some were the old stone crosses, both Celtic and Pictish, still there over 1,000 years after they'd been placed there by our forebears. Some were more modern crosses. And some were crosses in the landscape of the imagination. Now this later group are noted when we interpret the landscape through the cross. For example, when you see 4 ways crossing at a crossroads, or the name of a place, or perhaps the cross on a window or another part of a building, or a signpost, or a notice, or even just a couple of sticks. The Ruthwell Cross in Dumfries and Galloway is one of the best known Celtic crosses in the British Isles. It possibly marked part of an old pilgrim route that included Whithorn, the place where St Ninian lived, one of the Celtic saints responsible for bringing the gospel to the north of Britain. It stood in Ruthwell for many generations and told the gospel story to people who couldn't read. Later it was sadly cast down, broken up and buried, and then later still found again and raised up. An Easter story in itself. Ruthwell is not a large place, but it also boasts the only savings bank museum in Britain. It was opened by the local minister, also responsible for recovering the Ruthwell Cross in 1810. It was the world's first savings bank where ordinary people could save small amounts of money regularly and therefore help to lift themselves and their communities out of poverty. And it goes well alongside the cross. In Nig, on the way to Tain, there's another cross, but this time a Pictish cross slab. It also sheltered in the church after standing in the local landscape for many generations. Up the road at Shandwick, a perspex box has been built around the cross, but it still stands out above the town. The Nig stone is said to show the earliest recorded example in art of the Eucharist in Britain. The Holy Spirit descends on the bread and wine. It's as simple as that, and predates all our divisions on the subject. The two ends of the remembered gospel, the baby and the cross, speak of vulnerability. We vulnerable ones see the vulnerable one, blooded, birthed and crucified. We may spend a lifetime trying to expunge vulnerability from our nature, to become immune to economic, political or biological pandemics, but we cannot. We can only agree that it is vulnerability that unites us and links us to the one who hung on for us. Here is a thinking space for you to think about it. Maybe you can think of some crosses you have seen and what they mean to you as we take a short pause. The cross of Jesus has been called the tree of life since at least medieval times. There are many depictions of it in history, some more tree-like than others. One of the things we would do on the end-to-end is look for a tree of the day. A tree of the day is a tree that stands out in a landscape for whatever reason. It catches your eye by its shape, position or species. It makes a statement saying, "Ho! Here I am. I'm a tree." Trees are an important part of the web of life on our planet. We are increasingly finding this out and needing to repent our communal disregard of trees. Each year someone searches for the tree of the year for the countries of the British Isles and also for Europe. Ancient and significant trees are chosen and voted for. Each has their own special story. But even the smallest tree can be a tree of the day. Radio 4 has decided to celebrate trees this year. As I walked along listening to the sound made by trees, I didn't know that this was called susurration. The writer, Thomas Hardy, claimed to be able to identify a tree from these sounds at the beginning of his book, Under the Greenwood Tree. And there's a very short programme about this on a Radio 4 website, which is mentioned in the text. Of course, it's not just trees that we are becoming more mindful of as we consider the future of the planet. As I walked along, I was aware that around me, the world at large was being ushered into a state of greater awareness about climate grief. This phrase, climate grief, is about sadness and loss, about all that is being swept away by the human-influenced climate change. Of course, there are still those that do not believe such change is happening. But it is interesting, in these days of the COVID-19 pandemic, how the scans of the Earth showed the lessening of climate-changing emissions over different parts of the globe as the virus moved around. We cannot say it is not us. We can say we care and it matters. Towards the end of the walk, I deliberately took the road through the flow country of the north of Scotland. The traditional Le Jog route used by Bob and Hannah follows the A9 along the coast and then slants up to John O'Groats across the last bit of Caithness via the Long Road and the Camps to Cairns. The new John O'Groats Trail seeks to avoid the A9, a busier and busier road, by following the coast, but it is still in the experimental stage. It can be hard to find and sometimes difficult to walk. The road through the flow country is a less busy route, followed part of the way by the railway. Forcinard Station houses an RSPB centre explaining the importance of the flow country for birds, both local and migratory. So what is the flow? Well, it's the largest area of blanket peat bog in Europe, and it's an essential habitat that is being eroded and reduced. It has global protected status, and there's much being done to extend it, but it is under threat as the planet warms and the bog dries out and the species keep a more tenuous hold on their niches. It was pretty wet the day I walked that way. Thankfully, Bob had found a small cafe in his reconnaissance mission, and as the thunderstorm broke over our heads, we settled down to enjoy the welcome and sample the menu. A friendly sheep took up guard duty at the door. So you see, we are surrounded by the remembered Bible. It's not fallen out of our culture. And it is our mission to point to it when we see it. Look, there, just like the prophet Anna in the temple. Of course, it's not all pretty stuff, though pretty stuff is important. We need it to lift our spirits, to offer some fun as we play those games God invites us into as we walk along, like this one. Here, do you know what this is? How many of these have you seen today? What is this yellow one? And these, what are they? Or these? Or even this? Where does this path go? These are just a few of the possible creative encounters. But it isn't all pretty stuff. Even though there are now green corridors through every town and city. It often depends where you look. Passing the end of a random street or a canal will give you different views in each direction. So too with the gospel. It depends where we look. Look for the gospel in unlikely places and you will find it. As one member of LCSB said at our big picture weekend at Douay Abbey, I'm hearing a different gospel. A gospel for the poor. And another said, "We are walking Bibles." Afterwards, as I thought about it all and considered a motto for the walk that might go on a t-shirt, I came up with, "Just walk." Whether literally or in your imagination, just walk while you can. On Good Friday we walk the most significant walk of all, as Jesus walks to the place of his crucifixion. We choose to go with him or to run away. We make the journey, sometimes symbolically, sometimes in our mind or memory. Now some wood might help us to think about the cross. At this point I was going to pass around some bits of wood for you to look at. Maybe you have some bits of wood that you could use now. Hold the wood. Look at it. Feel it. Consider it. What does wood stand for? What does it make you think of? Pause for a moment and think about that. During the walk I passed through many strips of woodland. Each had its own character, particular trees and other plants, fungi and animals. Some were dark woods, some were infused with light. Some sheltered me from wind and rain. In some the fungi glowed orange. In others the brown speckled wood butterflies danced in the rays of the sun. Woodland is a very British kind of countryside. We need it, yet we chop it down and try to erase it for our bigger projects. We need to get our priorities in order. What kind of world is a crosswise world in which the woodworker gives up his life on the wood for all the vulnerability of our shared planet? At the end of Isaiah 55 it says this, and it's a summary of this talk. "For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of a thorn bush, a cypress will grow, and instead of a bramble, a myrtle will come up. And it shall be to God for a memorial, an everlasting sign that shall never be taken down."